with that weird. Hey everyone, and welcome to Chef AJ Live. I'm your host, Chef AJ, and this is where I introduce you to amazing people like you who are doing great things in the world that I think you should know about. Today's guest is back by popular demand. She is an amazing plant-based doctor who actually does private virtual consultations, which is something that is much needed in the space of gastroenterology. She's also triple board certified, not just in gastroenterology, but also internal medicine and lifestyle medicine, which means she cares about whether or not you sleep, what you eat, do you exercise, do you have stress, questions that most doctors don't even have time to ask you. And she's just all around awesome. She's a new mother. You should follow her on Instagram if you want to see some adorable pictures of her children. Please welcome back to the show, Dr. Vanessa Mendez. It's so nice to see you again.
Thank you so much for having me again, AJ. You know, I love coming on your show and speaking to your audience about all sorts of nutrition and gut health topics. I'm excited to be talking about IBS today, irritable bowel syndrome, which is such a common digestive disorder affecting millions of people worldwide. And yeah, I'm happy to be here and be sharing this space with you guys.
Well, thank you so much, because I mean, it seems like either everybody I know either has IBS or lives with somebody that has IBS.
Absolutely. I mean, in the world that we're living in, not only because of all the stressors that are being bombarded at our eyes constantly, but also, all the issues with nutrition on the planet, is just a recipe for disaster in terms of gut health, and especially when it comes to IBS. It's the most common condition we see in the digestive health space.
And it's one of those conditions that people, they suffer in silence a lot, and they suffer, it seems, for a very long time.
Yeah, absolutely. So, there's two sides to the story. So basically, a lot of people come with digestive issues and they are told right off the bat, oh, you have IBS. And that's just simply not true. Irritable bowel syndrome is a diagnosis of exclusion. That means that we have to have ruled out other digestive issues with testing before we come to the diagnosis of irritable bowel syndrome. So just dismissing patients like that and saying you have IBS without doing an investigation, getting to that root cause of their symptoms is definitely one of the main issues. On the other side, we don't have a lot of great medical therapies for IBS. There are some medical therapies out there, but from my experience, an integrative approach is really the way to go with this, because it really is a gut-brain disorder. You both have to tackle the gut, but also the gut-brain connection. So we'll dig into that today.
Yeah, a long time ago, probably before you were born, didn't they think it was just like hysteria? Like weren't people often dismissed with this diagnosis as having
absolutely.
Almost a mental illness?
100%. And because if it's a diagnosis where we investigate with therapies, labs, imaging, and sometimes colonoscopy and endoscopy, and we don't find anything, it's kind of like an invisible disorder, then patients were dismissed and continue to be dismissed, even though now we have a lot of studies showing that this is a two-pathway disorder. It basically affects the motility of your gut, how fast or slow things are moving through your digestive system, but it also is a disorder of hypersensitivity. We have studies showing that you take a person without irritable bowel syndrome and one with IBS, you blow up a balloon in their rectum, and the person without IBS just perceives it as some discomfort, but the person with IBS will get excruciating pain. So there's definitely a lot of science behind it, but patients continue to be dismissed and told that this is in their head. They only have to manage their stress and they're going to be fine. And it's just a lot more complex than that.
What is the name of that test? I never had it. I'd love to have it. And does it have to be done by a gastroenterologist?
The balloon, the rectal balloon. So that was a study that was done. We do have some tests like that, but that was just under research conditions that it was done. We don't do that for patients, because it's a clinical diagnosis. I can tell by talking to you whether, and after ruling out other conditions, whether you have IBS or not. So you don't have to have that test. And again, it's not a test that's actually available to be ordered.
Okay, I was just wondering because it sounds very interesting. When somebody experiences GI symptoms, you can't always see a gastroenterologist right away, especially if you don't have one. You know what I mean? You often have to go through your primary.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So there's a lot of, we know there's a lot of issues with the healthcare industry and especially the insurance companies. So a lot of insurance companies will put restrictions on referrals, and patients won't be able to make a GI appointment themselves. But a lot of people will go outside their insurance and just see a specialist just because either their primary care won't refer them or or for many other reasons. But traditionally, yes, patients usually have to go to their primary care doctor first. A lot of insurance companies discourage primary care doctors from referring to specialists, which is another big issue in the health space.
But you're a primary in a way and a GI doctor. So somebody, if they were suffering and couldn't get in, you do virtual appointments. Do you do them in multi-states, or could you talk a little bit about how somebody could see you? Because when I had Dr. Will B on a few weeks ago, he's not seeing patients. He just said, see Dr. Mendez.
Yeah, absolutely. So Will's a good friend of mine. So he's always sending patients over. So I'm the co-founder of a telemedicine practice called Planted Forward. We're an integrative multi-specialty practice. So we have our integrative digestive team, which I'll show at the end of the slides. We have a cardiologist, a preventative cardiologist. We have a pediatrician who is lifestyle medicine board certified as well. We have several dietitians who are specialized in digestive disorders, and we have a health coach as well. So the way that we function is we're through telemedicine. Most of us can see patients in California, in Florida, and New York. And our dietitians, fortunately, because they're not bound by doctor restrictions of licensing, can see patients in about 15 to 20 states. So definitely they're part of our integrative team, and they are a must when working through digestive issues. So even if you're not in California, Florida, or New York, still reach out to us because our dietitians are likely to be able to see you. And again, they work under me, for example, if it comes to a digestive disorder. So patients don't need a referral to see us because we don't take insurance. The reason we don't take insurance is because insurance models do bind us to that 15, 20-minute appointment time. It's kind of like an assembly line of patients, and we're not able to give you the care that you need and deserve through that insurance models. But any labs, supplements, or medications or imaging that we may need to order is through your insurance. It goes through your insurance as usual. So the only thing that works a little bit differently is just seeing our consultations. You don't need a referral, and it's just direct pay.
Great, thank you. I know that you had some slides prepared. Would you like to share them?
Yes, absolutely. So let me go on here and then share this. Can you see it?
I sure can.
Perfect. So that worked. I'm getting better at this, AJ. I'm technologically challenged. All right. So today we're going to be defining irritable bowel syndrome, how to manage it, where the microbiome and the immune system are at play in this, and some of the integrative strategies we can use to manage patients with IBS. So what is IBS? And we'll have a lot of time, I think, for questions at the end, and I'll just try to go through these slides so that we have enough time. So IBS is a functional GI disorder where patients suffer from abdominal pain and altered bowel habits. What does that mean? So you have abdominal discomfort, sometimes abdominal pain, and then a change in how your bowel habits are. So either looser, more diarrhea, or more constipation, harder stools, or a mix of both. And like I mentioned before, we know now through many studies that there is a disruption in the motility of your gut, how fast things are moving through your gut, either too slowly, too fast, or a mix of both. And there is visceral hypersensitivity. Those are big terms, but it means that you're more hypersensitive to foods, to bloating, to gas. So a person who has, like I mentioned before, there was a study where somebody without IBS, they blow up a balloon in their rectum, And that person will feel discomfort, but it'll be tolerable. And the person with IBS will just feel a discomfort that is out of proportion to the amount of air that was put into that rectal balloon. So it is a hypersensitive gut. So things that you eat and things you put in your body, definitely stressors in your life will all affect this. So it's a condition that's affected by many things, not only nutrition, but also many other things that are happening in your life. It's very common. It's the most common disorder we see in my practice and in GI practices throughout the world. And it affects about 15% of the world's population, which is incredibly high, right? And in the United States, about 45 million people. But again, these are diagnosed. So I think this is an underdiagnosis of this condition. It's a lot more than this. We think, so we don't know the exact cause of this, but we do know that certain players are in this IBS game. And this is obviously the gut, but also the nervous system. So we have in our gut the enteric nervous system, which is its own nervous system, like the brain. So that's why we say the gut is the second brain, because it has the second highest connections of neurons and basically outside of the brain. So the gut and the brain interact and do affect IBS. So this is at play here. And we think that some of the factors that can predispose patients to IBS, I'll talk about them later, are things like childhood trauma, but also we very commonly diagnose this condition after having some kind of gut bug in your gut, right? So after a gastroenteritis or a virus in your gut, a lot of patients develop this hypersensitive gut and get diagnosed with IBS. And obviously this is, even though it's an invisible disease, that means you don't see it outwardly. You don't have any rashes. You don't have any, issues that people can see. So it's an invisible disease. It's very, very damaging, and it impacts patients' quality of life significantly. But the good news is that there's a lot that we can do to manage these conditions. A lot of people ask me, oh, can this be cured? I don't like to think of it like that because, for example, somebody who suffers from anxiety on and off, can it be cured? Well, that means you're predisposed to anxiety, but we can definitely manage you in a way where you're thriving and your anxiety is managed. So I don't like talking about these things like as in cure or not. Obesity, can you cure it? Well, yes, but if you go back to your old habits, it'll come back. So yes, technically we can cure it or put it in remission, but if the same factors that caused it in the first place surface, then it'll come back. So a lot of people confuse IBS and IBD. IBS, as I mentioned, the results from a dysfunction in how the gut, the nervous system, and the brain interact. It is a hypersensitive stomach, and it results in abdominal pain or cramping or bloating and changes in your bowel habits. How I personally manage IBS is a little bit differently from a lot of people, from a lot of GI doctors. I manage it primarily through nutrition, lifestyle, and gut-brain therapies and evidence-based supplements we use when we need to, and medications when they're indicated. But a lot of the times I find that the medications are not indicated long-term and are not, I don't need to use them in the majority of patients. And then people confuse IBS with IBD, which is very different disease. It's called inflammatory bowel disease. That is a diagnosis that is an umbrella term for things like Crohn's disease, ulcerative colitis, and microscopic colitis. The treatment is very differently, but we do still do lifestyle, nutrition, and integrative therapies in my practice for patients with inflammatory bowel disease. So I mentioned these before. So pain, cramping, diarrhea, and constipation, and you can have both. Bloating. Patients with IBS tend to have food intolerances. Some have very few, some have a lot of food intolerances, and they'll often say, hey, I can't tolerate fiber. My IBS just acts up. I cannot tolerate the abdominal bloating or the cramping. So we can talk about that in the Q&A at the end. And patients with IBS also suffer with fatigue. About 50% of patients with IBS reported having fatigue. So many factors can impact the development or the progression of this condition. We mentioned that some of the risk factors associated with being diagnosed with IBS are having a bug in your stomach, a gastroenteritis, or viral illness in your gut. Chronic stress, we know, is one of the triggers for it. Food intolerances, I wouldn't say as a risk factor. I would say it is one of the symptoms of having IBS. We see that spastic intestines, an imbalance in your gut microbiome absolutely can predispose you to IBS through many mechanisms, not only in that environment in the gut, but also in the gut-brain interaction. It can disrupt that if you have an imbalance in your gut microbiome. And then early life trauma, whether it be emotional, physical, or sexual trauma, those patients have an increased risk of developing irritable bowel syndrome, and having anxiety, depression, or other mental or neurological disorders increases your risk of having IBS as well. So managing IBS, as I mentioned before, there are many medications out there to manage IBS, and really it's about they manage the symptoms. They don't really get to the root cause of why you have IBS in the first place, but they help with the symptoms. And we certainly do use them to get patients to be more comfortable in the beginning. If the discomfort is moderate or to severe and they can't, and their quality of life is greatly affected, we can use medications. But these medications, in my opinion, shouldn't be used long-term, just because it's a Band-Aid. You're managing the symptoms, giving the patient better quality of life, but you're not really getting to the root cause of what is triggering their IBS, which is whether this is a stressor, past trauma they're not dealing with, whether this is a nutrition-based trigger, or what is at the root cause. So you really need to be doing both, managing their symptoms in the meantime to get them more comfortable, but also working to get to that root cause so you can give them that long-lasting healing that they need and hopefully put their disease into remission long-term. So I'm not going to go through this. This is how to classify your stool. So we see patients with IBS are at either extreme, either very pebbly stool, hard stools, hard to pass, or they have watery or looser stools, or a mix of both of these. This is called the Bristol stool chart. We use this to help patients kind of guide us to how their stools look. You know, we have many different ways of managing each condition. For example, addressing constipation. If you guys are not subscribed to my blog at drvanessamendez.com, drvanessamendez.com, I highly encourage you to. We pump out a blog every week, and they're really educational. Like the last one that I just released last week, it's all about antibiotics and antibiotic stewardship and how to ask your doctor the right questions so that you're not prescribed antibiotics incorrectly, and what to do to recover from antibiotics so your gut recovers, your gut microbiome recovers. So definitely recommend that you subscribe to my newsletter and see my blogs, because we have several blogs on constipation, for example. But some of my starting points with constipation that I want patients to start on are moving your body. You know, if you're not doing anything, just getting up and doing something. Because when we are sitting, like right now, AJ and I are sitting, our gut is not really doing much, you know, but when we move our abdominal muscles, and that stimulates the gut to contract. So movement, any type of movement, even just being up and about, is going to stimulate your gut to contract and help you relieve constipation. Obviously, drinking enough water. One of the most common mistakes that people make when they switch to a plant-based diet, they go from 0 to 100 in terms of how much fiber they're intaking, but they don't bring water along with it. So that's just going to block you up. So we need to be drinking lots and lots of water as we increase the amount of fiber in our diet. And we should increase the fiber in our diet gradually to not overwhelm your system, because your system is not used to tolerating a lot of fiber for some of you. So if you just go from 0 to 100, it's just going to overwhelm it. So go slowly and mindfully, and you should do well with bloating or constipation. One of my favorite things to relieve constipation is kiwi. So actually, and you should be following my Instagram, because I posted a study, how 2 kiwi per day. And what I recommend is, when they're in season, stock up on kiwi, freeze them, and then you can use them throughout the year. So 2 kiwi per day was actually shown to be as beneficial as some constipation supplements, and also as beneficial as prunes. And it was tolerated better. So kiwi had the least side effects of all of the other 2 therapies, prunes or a constipation supplement. So we love kiwi. Working on your toilet habits. A lot of people sit on the toilet for long periods of time. That's actually not recommended, because you're putting a lot of pressure on that pelvic floor. The pelvic floor is basically all the muscles and ligaments that hold up your rectum, your genitals, and your urethra and your bladder. So when you're sitting on the toilet for long periods of time, and we love to do this, we love to go on social media or read while we're on the toilet, both men and women, and that's not actually beneficial. That's actually can develop long-term bad habits and contribute to constipation, because the pelvic floor just has too much pressure there. It'll start to relax and get weak. So we don't want that. And using a squatty potty, it's one of my go-to strategies. I have a recent article on this through Live Strong, I think, that we talk about squatty potty. And squatty potty really means any stool you have laying around the home. You put it underneath your feet, so that when you're sitting on the toilet, your knees are above your hips. So kind of like you're lunging forward with your knees above your hips. Everybody should have a squatty potty. Any stool you can bring that can elevate your knee, your legs and your knees, kind of like you're resting your elbows on your knees, is beneficial, because it opens up the rectal angle and allows for smoother passage of stool without so much pressure on that pelvic floor. So even if you don't suffer with digestive issues, you should have a squatty potty, especially with women, because we have a lot of pelvic organs, a lot more than men. So we tend to have a more weight down as we age of that pelvic floor, and more pelvic floor dysfunction. But I recommend it for everybody. And obviously, if you're suffering with chronic constipation or any of the symptoms we talk about here, you really need to be seeing a gastroenterologist. And if you don't see improvement with some of these strategies, seeing a pelvic floor therapist, which is what we talked about, the pelvic floor. Pelvic floor therapist is a physical therapist that specializes in pelvic floor, and they're a godsend. I send all my females to a pelvic floor, and a lot of my males who suffer with constipation, because there's a lot that they can diagnose about weaknesses, or maybe you're contracting too much when you're trying to go to the bathroom, and they have an integrative way of managing these conditions with breathing strategies, exercises, hip flexors, all that cool stuff. So, in terms of managing IBS, we have this low FODMAP diet that I'm sure many of you have heard. It was developed through Monash University in Australia, and it basically is it's kind of a way to recognize which foods are contributing to excess bloating or abdominal discomfort in patients with IBS specifically. So this diet, I see a lot of patients doing it for way longer than they need to. Most patients have been doing it for months and years. And this diet is actually an elimination, reintroduction, and personalization diet. So it really should be guided with a registered dietitian. It should not be something that is handed to you by one of your doctors. Hey, here, follow this low FODMAP diet. Because long-term restriction of these high FODMAP groups of food actually will worsen your gut microbiome. It is a restrictive way of eating. That means that you're going to be avoiding a lot of the high fiber foods that we actually recommend that you eat. So we don't want you to do that for long term. And it really should be guided by somebody who knows how to do it, so that they can do the elimination period correctly, and then they can start working with you to reintroduce the foods. And in that reintroduction, the elimination period is to give you relief. It's going to give you relief from bloating, from discomfort. And then that reintroduction period will really define which foods you may be intolerant to. And then the personalization phase is working through, at least in our practice, how to get you to tolerate more variety of foods, and even the foods that you were intolerant to. Does that mean starting with a little drop of that food, then a teaspoon, then a tablespoon, etc., getting you to tolerate eventually the food in its totality? So that's how we do it in our practice. But really, you need to have, if you're going to do this diet, it needs to be guided with a registered dietitian. So I'm not going to go into the details of the low FODMAP diet because it is it's extensive. So how do we manage IBS through lifestyle? So, you know, some of the things that we do is teaching you, educating you on how to tolerate some foods. So one of the things that we love to talk to patients about is how to reduce bloating from beans, legumes, pulses. And what we want you to do is know that all of these legumes, pulses, beans are different. So you may actually tolerate some and not others. And that these are really beneficial foods for the gut microbiome. They're full of prebiotics, and these foods are eaten by the longest living populations throughout the world in the blue zones, right? So we really want to incorporate them in our diet. But a lot of people get discomfort with these foods because you're simply not used to eating them regularly. As Cuban American, I grew up on these foods, so I tolerate them well. But for example, my husband, who has Crohn's disease since he was 17 years old, used to not be able to eat any beans at all. Every time we would cook them, he would salivate. He would beg me to eat them, but every time he ate them, he got horrible symptoms. So when we switched to a plant-based diet and slowly started incorporating more high fiber foods, now he can eat like literally a bowl of beans. He can now eat me and beans. So that's definitely something. If you've been told, to avoid them forever because you can't tolerate them, that is a lie. You just have to work with the right team in order to be able to tolerate them. So some things that we recommend are rinsing, for example, your canned beans, or soaking overnight the dry beans. Adding herbs and spices, because actually these help break down some of the components that may cause bloating and help reduce bloating. So herbs and spices are a must when we're cooking beans or any fiber foods because they really help us digest them. Then obviously chewing thoroughly, mindfully, and staying hydrated through the process. As we mentioned before, when you increase the fiber in your diet, you have to increase the water with it. But also buying sprouted is another good way of getting beans in a way that you tolerate them better. So a lot of different strategies we have for these foods. So some of the other integrative approaches we have include, so we talked about getting to the root cause. Is this more of a nutrition-based disorder for you? Are you just not eating the right foods? Or is this more of a gut-brain disorder for you? Meaning, is there past trauma that we're not dealing with? Is there a chronic stressor? Are you the caretaker in your family? You're putting on a lot and you're not really taking the time for self-care. So we work to identify what are the triggers for your IBS. And these are some of the strategies, and definitely this is not the whole list, but these are some of the strategies that we incorporate. So there's lots of different breathing strategies that help engage the vagus nerve that runs from our gut to our brain and back and forth. Engaging the vagus nerve with vagal nerve maneuvers is a must in IBS. It's really going to strengthen that gut-brain connection and improve your visceral hypersensitivity. Deep breathing, belly breathing, diaphragmatic breathing, so many different breathing techniques. Meditation is a long-term game, right? So deep breathing strategies we can go into right away and do them anytime, anywhere. Meditation is really a long-term practice. Meditation and yoga are kind of like training for a 5K or a half marathon. It needs to be done regularly and long-term in order for you to see the benefits. But deep breathing, we can see the benefits right away. Things like acupuncture, obviously moving your body, nature bathing, forest bathing have all been associated with improvements in mood, but also in pain. So we use them in patients with IBS. And as I mentioned before, identifying which patients will benefit from pelvic floor therapies is really important. This is an underutilized referral that a lot of people would benefit from. And cognitive behavioral therapy, working with a therapist through your traumas, through your stressors, is all important in management of IBS. So I'm not going to go into these slides because I really want to leave time and space for questions. But this is our wonderful integrative team at Planted Forward. So our website is plantedforward.com. And if you go to the provider section, you can see each of us, our services, where we see patients, our pricing, and all of that. My integrative digestive team is made up of Amanda Sevilla. She's a yoga instructor, mindfulness coach, and registered dietitian. So she works a lot with the patients that have gut-brain issues. And I-10 and Natalie are my GI specialized dietitians who are specialized in working with patients with all types of digestive disorders. This is where they've done their training. And we just have a wonderful team. And even if you can't see me, you likely can see one of them. And again, like I mentioned, we work together as a team. And then we also have, for patients who have other conditions, we have or if you just need a pediatrician, we have Yolanda, Dr. Yolanda Rivera Caudil. She's a lifestyle pediatrician. We have Nicole Harkin, who's our preventative cardiologist. And we have Jackie Tarleton, who's our health coach. She's a yoga instructor, fitness coach, and also registered dietitian by training. So we just have a wonderful team, and we'd love to hear from you and how we can, serve this community who's in so much need of help, like not only everybody on here, but just patients suffering throughout the US and worldwide that would benefit from our services. And we see patients internationally as well.
Wow, thank you so much. I learned so much. There's some nice comments I want to read you. One is from Robin. Love you, Dr. Mendez. You are the best GI doctor. One of them. Maybe she's a patient.
Thank you, Robin.
Yeah. And let's see, I saw some other ones and I actually took some notes because I had a question to answer. Here's a funny comment. I have IBS, but I don't like dealing with poop. Well, that's what's nice about being a gastroenterologist. You don't mind dealing with poop or talking about it.
Absolutely. We're knee deep in poop.
You mentioned that kiwis were more effective in studies than prunes. I think a lot of people don't know that. And I think kiwis taste a lot better.
So the study compared kiwi, prunes, and I think psyllium husk, which is one of the supplements we use. It also comes in a powder, kiwi was just as good as prunes or psyllium, but it had less side effects, which is great because some of the others can have side effects, like actually it can relieve constipation, but increase bloating. Prunes and psyllium, patients do sometimes patients complain that those two will increase their bloating, but kiwi doesn't. And kiwi is just a great addition to your diet.
So does it have to be fresh or can it be dried kiwi?
So it does have to be fresh or frozen. It shouldn't be the dried ones. Because they just lose a lot of water in the drying process.
Good to know. You mentioned that one of the things you do to help patients manage their IBS is gut-brain therapy. There's two parts to that question. You say manage, so that leads me to believe that maybe IBS really can't be cured.
Yeah, so as I mentioned before, a lot of patients ask, and a lot of people just ask if IBS can be cured. And as I mentioned, it's a condition like diabetes. Can diabetes be cured? Yes, you can put diabetes into remission, right? You can reverse it, but will that mean that you're cured forever? No, because whatever risk factors were there to cause that, if you go back to those, like poor nutrition, then the diabetes will come back, right? So we really need to identify what triggers your IBS. And if we manage the triggers, yes, absolutely, you can go into remission long term.
Perfect. And what are some of these gut brain therapies that you do with patients?
Yeah. So basically, the gut and the brain are connected to three different pathways. One of the major pathways is the vagus nerve. So we'll come back to that one. But the other two pathways are through basically the creation of hormones and enzymes that the gut creates, and it sends them throughout the body, but it's also locally acting. The gut microbiome creates short chain fatty acids that are able to cross the blood-brain barrier, and they do have an effect in that gut-brain interaction. So having a beneficial microbiome profile is going to be helpful to managing IBS. And as I mentioned, the vagus nerve is that third pathway that runs from the gut and the brain. We want to engage the vagus nerve. So we do that through vagal nerve maneuvers. There are many vagal nerve maneuvers, and I have several of these maneuvers in my social media, but also on my website. But things like humming, things like deep breathing, belly breathing, engage the vagus nerve so that you activate your parasympathetic nervous system. We have two major nervous systems in our body. We have the fight or flight, which is the sympathetic nervous system. And then the opposite system is the parasympathetic nervous system, is the rest and digest. If we are not in a resting state, and that doesn't mean lounging in your house and doing nothing. You could be lounging in your house and be in fight or flight. It's all about how you're perceiving your environment. Are you really at peace? We can be at peace while we're at work, while we're in the middle of traffic. It's all about working to engage that parasympathetic nervous system. So by engaging the vagus nerve through deep breathing exercises, for example, another strategy are cold showers and humming, for example. By engaging that vagus nerve often, once, twice, 3 times per day, we're activating the rest and digest pathway. And that really optimizes the digestive system to receive the food, to churn it, process it, extract the nutrients it needs, and then send it on to the small bowel and colon, where in the colon, it's not going to cause a lot of bloating or discomfort as your microbiome is working to extract those last nutrients and all the nutrients from fiber. All that gas production and fermentation is not going to cause you to have out of proportion pain. So by engaging the vagus nerve through those different maneuvers, such as humming, cold showers, deep breathing as the lowest hanging fruit, we can do that anytime, anywhere, then we can really optimize the digestive system and decrease that visceral hypersensitivity that is causing all that bloating and abdominal pain in your case.
Nice. Well, now maybe we can combine this and hum in the shower instead of sing in the shower.
Cold shower and humming. Let's do it.
Sounds great. That's so interesting. And here's another nice comment from MJ. I've learned so much today. An amazing session. Thanks for presenting the program. You're so welcome. So now we have some questions that were sent in. And guys, whenever a doctor's a guest, we get a lot of questions. You got to email them in advance. We give those priority. The first one is from Heidi. And she says her 9-year-old niece was just diagnosed with an extremely rare condition called pediatric collagenous gastritis. She says she knows there's little known about the treatment, but that inflammation is obviously key. Her mother's an endocrinologist, but the holistic side of things is generally not what they follow. I have seen that gluten-free can help. Is this something you're familiar with? And can you see younger patients, or can you only see adults?
Yeah, absolutely. So I am an adult gastroenterologist, but my registered dietitians can see kids. So unfortunately, we're seeing a lot more gastroenteritis, gastritis, colitis in kids nowadays. And this has definitely a lot to do with the current state of the world that we're living in, the food processing, the excessive hygiene that we're living under. This is all contributing to these autoimmune conditions and also GI related conditions. So definitely, I think our registered dietitians, depending on which state you are able to work with you. one of the things that I posted about today on my social media is if your child is struggling, or as an adult, you're struggling to keep weight on, you have too many food intolerances, or you have vitamin and nutrient deficiencies, the number one supplemental formula we recommend is Kate Farms. They're organic, vegan, and they don't have chemical additives like a lot of those shakes, like Ensure is probably the worst thing you could put, Boost and Ensure, the worst things you could put in your body. So in children, unfortunately, they can really quickly lose weight and become malnourished when they're struggling with these GI conditions. So look into Kate Farms, but also work with a registered dietitian with these food-related issues, so that the child doesn't suffer malnutrition or vitamin or nutrient deficiencies. And that would be my best advice. And if, with kids, there's a lot of unknowns, especially in this autoimmune and digestive space. So if you don't have a local GI pediatrician that can really help you, going to a center of excellence, such as, as a second opinion, such as Cleveland Clinic, Mayo, or these bigger academic centers. So I don't know what happened to AJ, but I will keep talking.
Oh, my, sorry. I accidentally, well, that was so great that you were willing to go on with the show. I accidentally must have hit the button and I muted myself. That is funny, but I could hear you the whole time. And I said, thank you for answering that question. Here's a question from Michelle, and she says that she's following Dr. B's growth protocol out of his new cookbook to try to determine histamine and salicylate intolerances. I suspect maybe both, but he says they have similar symptoms. Have you ever seen anyone with both? And if so, have they overcome them? I've had swelling in my face and tongue from taking extra strength Excedrin as a teenager, so I'm not sure if I'm just allergic to aspirin or if I have a salicylate intolerance.
Yeah. So, I mean, Will's new cookbook is amazing because he really talks about a subject that a lot of GI doctors and the rest of the doctors don't have any training on, don't have any knowledge of. And he really is making this information widely available to so many people and helping so many. But with these conditions, it's really important that you do see somebody who can help you. So again, working with an integrative team of a GI doctor and a registered dietitian is really important to decipher if you're suffering with both, if you're just suffering with one, and how to overcome this. So, you need that personalized approach that a book won't, can't really give you, because it's you're reading it and you're interpreting it, but you're not getting that second opinion that you need to really walk you through that process. You may need allergy testing, and definitely an integrative approach would be the way to go to get to the bottom of what your issue is and how to overcome it.
Great, thanks. Okay, here's a question from Melissa. I had a colonoscopy 3 years ago and was diagnosed with diverticulosis. After that, I began eating whole food plant-based. I recently had a colonoscopy and there was no mention of diverticulosis. I didn't think this condition ever went away. Can you explain how eating whole food plant-based might have changed the diagnosis?
Yeah, I love that question. The colon and a colonoscopy. The colon is, even though we think of it as a hollow tube, it actually has a lot of waves. It's constantly moving, even while we're doing a colonoscopy. It has a lot of folds. So diverticula are these small pockets that can be small, medium, or large, and can predispose you to infection of these diverticula. They can bleed as well. So they can get complicated. They can even rupture, requiring that you undergo a partial colon resection, removal of a part of your bowel. So one of the most common risk factors for diverticulosis is a low fiber diet. So for many decades, patients, because there wasn't any data available, they used to be told, actually don't do a high fiber diet because you're gonna you're gonna worsen your diverticulosis, you're gonna have complications from it. Well, we have large scale studies actually showing the opposite, that a high fiber diet is actually preventative in terms of complications from diverticulosis. It'll prevent complications such as bleeding, infection, or progression of the diverticular disease. So these small pockets, when we eat, they can get irritated when we eat. But what study shows is that a high fiber diet, because it bulks up your stool, remember, as long as you're drinking enough water, it's going to bulk up your stool, and it's going to prevent any stool particles from lodging in these small pockets. So it's actually bulking up your stool and kind of creating a film around it, so it comes out large volume bowel movements, smooth, etc. What the worst part is, the pebbly stools, such as in constipation, those are the ones that can get lodged in the diverticula. So we don't want constipation, and we know fiber can help prevent constipation or help alleviate constipation, fiber and water. These large scale studies actually showed that patients who ate even popcorn, nuts and seeds, which patients with diverticulosis were previously told to completely avoid because they were going to get lodged in these small pockets, actually showed that high fiber, even with nuts, seeds, grains, and popcorn, prevented complications from it. So what probably happened is that your diverticula were likely irritated before and they were very visible, but now they're still there. They don't recede, but they are small and they're not irritated, so they're hiding behind a fold, and they weren't perceived. I see it all the time. I'll do a patient's colonoscopy 1 year, then we work through a high fiber diet, tons of water, movement, and then the next year we'll repeat it, and I won't be able to see their diverticula. They're still there. The tissue doesn't grow back, but they're not irritated and the condition hasn't progressed, which is the best news possible. So that's likely what happened in your case.
Great. I love the explanation. Thanks. So this is from Nathalie. Could you please ask Dr. Mendez why I would have bile going back up to my stomach when it's too bad it causes pain and I feel it in my back under my right shoulder blade? I do not have a gallbladder anymore.
Yeah, so many reasons for that. It could be that your stomach motility is not how it should be, that things are not moving along as much as they should. And when the bowel or your stomach is not contracting, or things are not moving along, then bile is gonna come back from the small bowel into your stomach and maybe even go up to your esophagus and cause heartburn. So it could be many things. Having had your gallbladder removed is one of the risk factors that can contribute to the bile coming back up. So anatomical difference, prior surgeries, the motility of your gut not being how it should, being too slow. Other issues like small intestinal bacterial overgrowth could also be at play, but that's less likely. So it's likely because of the surgery, unfortunately, and your stomach not having the motility that it needs to. There is a lot we can do to alleviate that, but it has to be through getting to the bottom of what caused it in the first place. So a personalized approach.
Oh, she could have a consultation with you, get to the bottom of it. I posted the link on how to do it. It's also in the show notes.
Awesome.
This is from Keisha. Well, you kind of answered this, but she's asking for a specific number. How many prunes will naturally help constipation, or are there other foods that will naturally help? I'm already on a whole food plant-based SOS-free diet. Thank you.
I think in the study they used, don't quote me, look at my Instagram, but I think in the study they used 10 prunes, which is a lot. So I'd rather do 2 kiwi, but don't quote me on that. Go to the study on my profile. And if you can't find it, just message me through there and I'll send it to you.
Okay, thank you. This is from Brenda. I know that potatoes and tomatoes are so good for us, yet my hubby is sensitive to nightshades, potatoes, tomatoes, and peppers. And of course, he loves these foods and he eats lots of them. How do these foods affect someone who has nightshade sensitivities? And what can they do for this situation? And what substitutes do you suggest?
Yeah, so why does he have nightshade sensitivity? And is it really a nightshade sensitivity? There's a lot of unknowns with that situation. It's not common to have nightshade sensitivity. And then, so is it really a sensitivity to nightshades? And two, why does he have it? There should be an explanation of some microbiome dysfunction there, some issues that the microbes are not digesting these nightshades correctly. So it would be in working through that we would identify the cause and help him tolerate the nightshades, right? The idea is to be able to tolerate a high variety of foods, not to restrict them. And I'm glad that he loves them and is trying to incorporate them in his diet, but we need to get to the root cause of why.
Yep, absolutely. So this is from Anonymous because it's a sensitive issue. It's about, I believe, the pelvic floor. I have a very severe pelvic organ prolapse and I'm trying to avoid surgery. Prolapse likely caused by 3 hours of pushing out a posterior baby. I've done extensive pelvic floor PT and sometimes use a pessary to help. I have eaten a Chef AJ McDougall style SOS free diet for 13 years. I'm very lean and I need to eat a lot of food to maintain my weight. The pressure of 6 to 9 pounds of food puts on my gut and pelvic floor throughout the day makes my prolapse very symptomatic. I've resorted to eating one huge meal at night, off and on for several years now, to minimize the symptoms during the day, but this has caused constipation issues, the beginning of GERD, and other problems. I'm considering surgery to fix the POP, but I'm afraid eating large volumes of bulky food during the day will cause the repair to fail. I find nuts very addictive and they give me gallbladder pains, so I don't find adding those higher caloric dense foods in my diet to be a feasible solution. Any thoughts? This sounds like a very complicated situation.
Yeah. Absolutely, very complicated. I'm glad that you have had extensive physical therapy with a pelvic floor therapist. I would ask you, have you gotten other second opinions of other pelvic floor therapists? And what do they think? Have they been able to help you? There's certainly a lot nutrition-wise we can do to prevent that huge bulk of food from coming into your pelvic floor and weighing it down. So I would highly recommend working with a registered dietitian. And if you haven't, because there's a lot we can do nutritionally wise to maximize your nutrition and not have that bulk at one time, kind of like that dumping into your pelvic floor. So working with a registered dietitian is a must. And then I would urge you, if you haven't sought a second or third opinion with another pelvic floor therapist, to do so, because they may have another take on it. So those would be my two recommendations. But certainly, a severe case of pelvic floor dysfunction, like I mentioned with women, many issues are at play, many risk factors for having pelvic floor dysfunction, which will affect not only causes constipation, it can cause us, fecal incontinence or leakage. It can cause us sexual dysfunction, pain when we have sex. It can cause urinary dysfunction, so bladder incontinence, or even cystitis, chronic inflammation of the bladder. So many different things in the women's pelvic floor that can be affected. And the risk factors are certainly hormonal shifts as we age, carrying large babies, any abdominal surgeries, many things, and just having so many more organs than men. We're just lucky enough to have all of that. But those would be my two recommendations for her.
So thank you. This is a lovely comment from Essa, who says, I had an appointment with Dr. Mendez yesterday. Very informative and helpful. She is awesome.
Oh, thank you, Isa.
That part of the question that intrigued me was the part about eating large volumes of food, because in dealing with helping people lose weight using caloric density, when you eat a lower calorically dense diet, you're going to have to eat a larger volume of food. And I'm just wondering, how much food can the GI tract handle? Because when I think about people that are 100% raw that also eat a low fat diet, they're eating, like 10 to 14 pounds of food a day. And are we able to handle all that?
Absolutely. So we have a very, very long digestive tract. Like our small bowel is many feet long, so we can certainly accommodate a lot of food in our digestive system. So yes, absolutely. We're really biologically, we are made to be able to tolerate a fully herbivore diet.
Wow. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting. Well, those are all the questions that are submitted in. I want to respect your time. If you have time to take one or two more for them chat, we can do that, or you can.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's take some from the people that are here.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. I try to prioritize the ones that send them in because they did take the time to write. So Mary Beth, who's watching live, says, I don't have a gallbladder. I've been having pain in my abdomen area. It was removed 10 years ago. My doc suggests an MRI to see if stones are back. But I thought removing the gallbladder solved the stone problem. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, absolutely. So you don't have a gallbladder, so you're not going to have stones in your gallbladder, but we can have a little bit of stones still sometimes stuck in the bile ducts that are still there that are draining from the pancreas and the liver. So an MRI is a good study because it doesn't have radiation, and it's able to visualize a lot of your abdominal organs, your digestive organs. So I don't disagree with that. But abdominal pain can be caused by many things. So stones would not be high on my differential of what's going on there. But I think an MRI is a good study to get done. So definitely follow up with that.
Great. And Diane says, do you have suggestions for GERD?
Yeah, so I have a blog post and an article and on my Instagram as well, some posts on this. So again, it's getting to the root cause of your GERD. Is it an anatomical issue? Have you had surgeries? Do you have excess abdominal fat? So fat around your midsection is one of the contributing factors for heartburn in many people. So even if you're thin, but you're carrying a little excess weight around your midsection, that can certainly be the cause of it. One of my favorite integrative approaches to deal with GERD or heartburn, acid reflux, is to do diaphragmatic breathing. So the diaphragm sits right between your lungs, one of our breathing muscles. So lungs, diaphragm, your diaphragm, and then your abdomen, all of that, right? So when we have heartburn or acid reflux, usually that is a dysfunction of the muscle or sphincter that connects our esophagus with our stomach, that with time, with excess abdominal weight, that muscle that divides our esophagus from our stomach gets looser and is not able to seal the stomach contents, that acid, from going up into your esophagus. So that's where you feel the acid reflux or heartburn. So what we want to do is tighten that muscle, but we want to do it in a non-surgical way, right? So one of the best therapies is diaphragmatic breathing, because this is a special breathing technique that in research studies has been shown to tighten that strengthen the diaphragm so that that muscle is tightened. And patients with time and practice of this diaphragmatic breathing are able to tighten that muscle and improve their heartburn or acid reflux in a integrative way. So I would definitely recommend looking into diaphragmatic breathing. But also getting to the root cause of why you have acid reflux to begin with. Is it diet? Is it anatomy? Is it excess weight in your abdomen? Many reasons why.
Thanks. Dawn says, I'm bloated all the time, and I wasn't before. It just happened really since I had COVID. I'm not sure why. I've been eating a lot of veggies and smoothies to help, but I still bloat after a meal. I have Hashimoto's, and they say that can cause bloating. Bloating is like a real common symptom, isn't it?
Yeah, it's the most common symptom. So, we didn't talk about COVID in this presentation, but we are seeing a lot of new digestive issues after COVID. We know that the digestive system has a lot of SARS-CoV-2 receptors. So outside of the lungs, the digestive system likely has the second highest number of receptors that these viruses bind to. And we say, okay, but I had mild COVID, or I had no symptoms with COVID. How is it that it's affecting my digestive system? Unfortunately, these viruses bind to your digestive system and can stay there for months. Obviously, we've only known of this pandemic for two and a half years, so we don't know if it stays in your system for longer than that, but it does bind to your digestive system for weeks and months, and it wreaks havoc. Studies show that it actually changes your gut microbiome to a more pro-inflammatory gut microbiome. Do we think that that's long lasting? I personally don't think so. If we put all the right strategies with nutrition and lifestyle into play, I know we can reverse that. I've seen it with my patients, but definitely COVID does affect your gut. And I'm not at all surprised that it caused your bloating. And we just need to get that microbiome back in an integrative approach through nutrition and lifestyle. So there's just been an imbalance in your microbiome. So now the microbes that are able to digest those foods are either reduced in number, or you have more of the bad ones. So we just have to get that microbiome back into shape.
Right, great. Well, thanks. This has been so enlightening. I hope people will make appointments with you, because we have testimonials from people watching live that you're a wonderful doctor and you're obviously very knowledgeable. So thank you so much, Dr. Mendez.
Thank you so much, AJ. I'm always happy to be on here. You're bringing so much great information to our communities. And thank you guys for tuning in. Reach out to me through my website, drvanessa.com, or social media at plantbasedgut. AJ has all that information there, or through Planted Forward if you're interested in booking with any of our integrative providers.
And one of your dietitians will be on later on this year.
I know. I love it. You guys are going to meet Aitan later on. I love it.
Thank you so much. Thanks, Dr. Mendez. And thanks all of you for watching another episode of Chef AJ Live. Please come back tomorrow when my guest is Yelena Perez. She is going to be making fresh sweet potato summer rolls with a low-calorie peanut